Yeah, this is gonna be fun. So I have never, ever, ever made a quilt before. And a while ago, when I purged my sewing room closet, I had this ginormous bin of scraps. And I decided that when I would purge, when I went through it, that I saved all of the cottons that I had. The goal of day one is to sort this into colors because I would like to make a rainbow quilt. So this is going to be sort number 1 to get these scraps into basic rainbow colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, navy, and purple. As I'm sorting, I notice I don't have very many orange or yellow pieces. Also, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering how all of this is going to come together with the colors I do have, compared to what is actually in a rainbow. I have a lot of pink. Pink's not in a rainbow. Oh, and wouldn't you know it, I actually found a piece of rainbow fabric. Because this is my very first quilt, I'm going to take the advice of Karen Brown on Just Get It Done Quilts on YouTube.
Not only do you want to keep the pattern simple, you also want to start small.
The quilt I want to make is going to be a 9x9 square, and each square is going to be 9 3-inch cut squares for a finished size of roughly 5.5 feet square, which probably isn't simple or small in the eyes of Karen Brown. But as she says,
I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make.
Now, the original concept for this quilt came from, of course, a picture I found on Pinterest, which is this rainbow quilt, but there's no way, as my first quilt, I'm going to try to tackle making the square inside of a square inside of a square. But I did really like the look of the rainbow colors. And then I found this quilt, and I really liked how they had more of the reds going down the center of the quilt, because red just happens to be my favorite color. Now, yes, this is a rainbow quilt, but it is sort of a repeating rainbow, which I like and I didn't like. And after staring at all of the colors in the rainbow and all of my fabric, I have decided to do something a little different. My concept is going to look like this. I'm going to keep the design of the 9x9 squares, and each of the squares are going to have 9 squares. But I want to use more colors in a color gradient than just rainbow colors, which includes all of these. My color gradient starts at a light blue through several other colors of blue, dark blue, light purples, dark purples, fuchsias, and the reds. Now I have a lot of red because I happen to like red. Mine's going to have 3 rows of red down the center. Then we go into the orange, yellow, light browns, dark browns, blacks, onto some grays, and then finally, black and white. Now, as I have sorted all of these into specific colors, I've noticed that I did not have enough of certain colors, especially in the yellows, black and white, and my light blues. So I went shopping today and got some extra colors. I have a couple more for my black and white, light grays, got some yellows, did get a couple more oranges, got a purple, a light purple, light blues. So now I think I'm ready to start cutting out all of these squares. And no, I didn't have enough colors. When I brought all the fabric piles out here to start cutting, I actually counted the number of fabrics I had in each pile, and I needed 9 different fabrics because I want 9 different squares in each of my color blocks. And so I went running off to the thrift store to find shirts and pillowcases, bed sheets, and all kinds of things that I could use to make up the difference in the colors. And this basically took me an entire day to cut out. Now I know how hard it is for quilters when they work on quilts, because this is no small task. Now, a couple of things that made my life easier. I have this clear plastic, I guess it would be a quilter's cutting guide. I put tape to block off the size I needed so that it would make it very easy for me to cut one side, turn it around, and cut the other. I also highly recommend, and even in my regular sewing, cutting out patterns, I have now become a super fan of the rotary cutter. This is just a simple Olfa cutter, but what I have in it are blades from Guggenheim. Now, this is a company that is not sponsoring this video in any way. They don't do any affiliate marketing. They only do scissors and these blades very well. If you have not heard of them, I will put a link in the description below to their website. I have switched out all of my scissors for their products because they are so sharp and they're so good, and they have a lifetime guarantee. So if anything ever goes wrong with this, I can get another pair for free. So here's my only dilemma. I have 6 yellow color block squares that will be in this row. My thoughts are that I need to create one specific layout and use the same layout for each of my squares. That way it will have a consistent look across the quilt, rather than just choosing randomly for each of these squares and having them all over the place. I'm going to go onto Pinterest and look for some other 9x9 square quilts to see what they have done, to see if they are consistent in their layout of squares.
1 hour later.
So I've gone ahead and laid out all of my yellow pieces randomly in my 6 color blocks. And I think that I'm going to go with this sort of a layout throughout all of my quilt and all my colors. I did go on Pinterest and I found another quilt that is very, very symmetrical, where all of their color strips are exactly the same in each of their color blocks throughout the quilt. And after comparing that quilt to the one that I really liked from the beginning of the video, I think that it would be best for me to go with a random layout, because I think the one that is so symmetrical is a little too neat, a little too overkill. But I am going to lay out all of my colors in my blocks for all of the other colors that I have so that they can be as random as possible. That means it's finally time to start sewing this all together. I'm starting with the yellow blocks since I have them all laid out. And if you've never made a quilt before, you sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. As I'm doing this, I know I need to set this up more like an assembly line so that it will go faster and I won't waste so much thread. Making a quilt also means lots of trips to the ironing board because you need to press all of your seams in one direction before sewing more sections together. Well, that's one. 1 out of 81, so only 80 more to go. I think that looks pretty good. I got all of my lines to match up, all of my corners line up, something I'm very OCD about, and I have it nice, neatly pressed.
1 hour later.
Boy, are these pretty. I really like the randomness of all the different fabrics and colors. And this is how they would look in a diagonal line when they're in the quilt. Which means I'm on to the next color, and I think we will fast forward a bit to when I get all of these put together.
The next day.
Good morning. Well, I worked till about 1 o'clock in the morning last night. And this is as much as I got accomplished with all of my other video editing of the time-lapse footage. From cutting all of these out, I did manage to get this much put together, and I am in love with what I see. I'm very glad that I did a random layout of my squares. I'm really hoping that today I can get all of the other color blocks sewn together. This is about the size the quilt will be when it is finished. And I'm very excited to see the rest of it all come together. So here's what I do for each block. I take the top one and I turn it down like this. And I sew these 3 first. And I'm using white thread to sew everything together. It's not going to show through in any way. So I just picked something neutral and going with it. I open this up. And I bring the bottom one up and I stitch these on. Now, when you're quilting, you need to set your seams first. And then I take mine, and this is the face of it. I turn it down, and I press my seams downward. And I don't clip these threads. I want them to stay connected, which makes it easier for me to sew these together. And I pin them together where the seams are, line them up as best as I can. Flip this over. I pin both sides at the same time. And then I press the seams to the left. I flip it over. And there's my block, which doesn't take very long at all. As I sit here and make these blocks, I am transported back in time to when I was a little girl, sitting at the feet of my grandmother and pinning the binding on the quilt she was making so she could hand stitch it into place. When she passed away, my grandfather took many of her quilt tops to a ladies' quilting group at a local church. They would add the batting and backing layers and then sit there for hours hand quilting them together. These then got passed down to all of us grandkids. The one I have, I believe, is called a Dresden plate. The main squares and striped borders are sewn together on the machine, but every single one of these flower petals are hand sewn on as an applique on top. And yes, all of those diagonal lines of quilting are hand sewn as well. When I was young, we had this one quilt we called the sick quilt, because when anyone in our family was sick, they got wrapped inside this quilt and it would magically make them all better. Probably because quilts are made with hours of love poured into them. My mother at one point started quilting, and my dad made her a very nice wooden quilter's frame that sat in the living room for years. I myself most definitely have been bitten by my mother's love for sewing, but only now at the age of 59 have I ventured into the world of quilting. I have felt for a long time like something in my life of sewing has been missing. That's been since about 2020 when COVID happened and I had been given all of these cottons to make masks from. So I've been holding on to it for the last 6 years, thinking that one day I would make a quilt from it all. Finally, that time has come, and I am amazed that I have gotten this far with this project. Quilting has always seemed like a daunting task, but now that I have gone through this process, it is relatively simple once you figure out your layout. Mine will not be a traditional quilt, so to speak, but as Karen Brown would say, it is the quilt that I want to make. Well, I think that's it for today. I've been sewing for most of the day. It's about 10 o'clock at night, but I am really happy with the progress. Got all the browns, the orange, the fuchsia, love this, the purples, really love the progress and the way this looks. And I have the 3 rows of red down the center to do. To give you an idea of time, this row of fuchsia took me 45 minutes to put together from start to finish. I would say I probably have about 3 hours left of sewing to put the red rows together because there's more of them. But I am so excited.
3 days later.
Yes, it has been 3 days. But a lot of life has happened in these last 3 days, not just sewing. I am super excited to report that our second shed is now finished and all of our storage all around the outside of our house can change. And I now have all 81 color blocks finished. Now, the only color block that does not have 9 different fabrics in it is the dark red that runs down the center. When I initially cut out all of my reds, I had 16 different fabrics and I cut 14 squares of each one because I had calculated the number of pieces I needed to make the 3 rows. So when it came time to sew these 3 rows, I wanted to differentiate between the 3. And I realized I didn't have 18 different fabrics to put 9 in this one and 9 in this one. So what I decided to do was put all of the dark ones down the center, and the 2 rows that run alongside, I have 9 different of the brighter red fabrics in those. Yes, I will have some repeats down the center, but that's okay because I like how it is a darker red compilation of fabrics. So now that I have all of my blocks, the one thing that I need to do is kind of square them up just a little bit. Now, I am in no way a professional quilter, and this is going to be the one and only quilt that I make in my lifetime. And being the type of person that I am, I did not have all of my fabrics pressed when I cut out my 3-inch squares. So some of my squares were a little crooked, but my lines came together nicely and all of my corners meet where they're supposed to. Be that as it may, some of my blocks are a little crooked. So I'm going to take the time to use my measuring ruler and straighten up just the edges so they're a little more square before I sew them all together. So the plan to sew this quilt together is to sew this row of blocks together first, which I have laid out here on the floor, ready for me to sew together. Now, according to Karen Brown, when you sew your blocks together, you should sew them together in groups, not one after the other, although I don't see why you couldn't do that with these rows, but I will follow her instructions and sew them together in pairs. Then you sew the pairs together until you get one complete row. And that looks like this. Only 8 more rows to go. Ta-da! Now we are getting somewhere. And just like the rows of blocks, you sew the first 2 rows together, then row 3 and 4 together, row 5 and 6 together, and so on. And no, you can't see the whole thing until it's done, which will be in 3, 2, 1. And just like that, my quilt Flimsy is done. And if you didn't know, that's what this is called, a flimsy. Now I have to figure out what color fabric I'm going to use for the backing and for the binding edge. Now my first instinct is telling me to go with a black. I think that would really set off all of the colors. I definitely don't think I want to do any red, as there is so much red in the quilt. I think that would be a little bit much. I've thought about maybe a blue or a purple. Not sure yet. Now my husband suggested that I use a green for the binding since I did not use any in my quilt. Now there are splashes of green throughout the quilt, but no one single area that had a dark green or a light green. Sorry to all of you green lovers out there, it's just not my color. These are all my favorite colors. So what have I learned in all of this? Well, it is really important that you take the time to press all of your fabrics before cutting them out. It would have saved me a lot of time in the long run if I would have done that in the beginning. And now you can't tell looking here, but some of my lines are not straight. The pieces are a little askew. Most all of my lines intersect very nicely. I have some corners that are off here and there, but for me, I'm very happy with the way this has turned out. Now, as you know, most all of these fabrics that I used were quilting cottons, but there are some fabrics that were not. Did it make a difference? Yes, because the fabrics that were not quilting cottons had a lot more give and stretch. That also contributed to my lines being a little off. And I'm very excited to move to the next part. That's why I'm making this a 2-part series, because I think this video is long enough with the process of making this flimsy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button. And stay tuned as the sewing madness continues when I try to figure out what color backing I want to use for this quilt and we get it all finished up.